Prince gave them a hit, but they refused to be the band everyone expected. Four women with sharp guitars, flawless harmonies, and an attitude that made the entire industry uncomfortable. While they were marketed as pretty faces with rhythm, they were fighting for full control of their music, and they won, but the price was high. This is the story of the Bangles, how they rose to the top, challenged every stereotype, and ended up paying for not fitting the mold.
See what's become of me. Gonna make your dreams come true.
The 1980s had just begun when three women gathered in a Los Angeles garage, unaware they were about to write an unforgettable chapter in rock history. They had no contracts, no record labels backing them, no producers shaping their sound. What they had was something far more powerful, a human connection, a musical chemistry that was felt from the very first chord. Susanna Hoffs, Vicki Peterson, and Debbie Peterson were young, enthusiastic, and obsessed with rock from the 1960s. They shared a love for the Byrds, the Beatles, and anything that echoed with authentic harmonies and clean guitars. That night at Susanna's parents' house, while playing covers of the classics that had shaped them, something unusual happened. Their voices intertwined so naturally they couldn't ignore it. In that moment, they weren't just playing other people's songs, they were discovering their own sound. They decided to form a band, not as a hobby, but as a statement. From the start, they knew they didn't want to fit the mold of what was expected of women in music. They wanted to play, compose, and be fully involved in the creative process, not just show up as the face of someone else's vision. The group went through several names before landing on the final one. They started as the Colors, then the Supersonic Bangs, until they settled on the Bangs. But just as they were starting to gain visibility, they discovered that an East Coast band already had the name trademarked. It became a race against time. They had to think fast and tweak it by just one letter, and that's how they officially became the Bangles. From the very beginning, their style was hard to pin down. It was rooted in garage rock with psychedelic undertones, yet carried a punk attitude inherited from the California scene. And that puzzled the industry. They were too authentic to be pop, but too melodic to be hard rock. Still, that in-between identity was exactly what made them special. They started off playing small clubs and indie circuits, sharing stages with bands from the so-called Paisley Underground, a music movement that reimagined 60s sounds through a modern lens. And it didn't take long before someone influential took notice. Prince, the genius from Minneapolis, heard a demo from the Bangles and was intrigued. It wasn't common to find an all-female group that wrote, played, and sang with such precision. He liked what he heard so much that he decided to give them a song. He didn't ask for money, didn't seek the spotlight. He simply handed them a track called Manic Monday. The song had everything it needed to become a hit. It sounded modern but had a classic soul. When the Bangles released it in 1986, it was like lighting a fuse. The single quickly climbed the charts in the United States and Europe, catapulting the band into a level of fame that could no longer be ignored. Suddenly, the girls who once practiced in a garage were everywhere, on the radio, on television, on magazine covers. The industry that once didn't know how to label them was now scrambling to capitalize on their success. But this was only the beginning. The Bangles were ready for something bigger. What they didn't yet know was that reaching the top doesn't always come with stability. And when everything starts to shine, the shadows aren't far behind.
All the old paintings on the tomb, they do the stand dance, don't you know? Walk like an Egyptian.
The success of Manic Monday was like a smoke bomb that covered everything. Where there was once curiosity, now there were expectations. Where there was once intimacy, now there were cameras. And while the public celebrated the Bangles as the new stars of pop rock, deep within the heart of the band, a tension was beginning to form, one no hit could prevent. Shortly after that first big breakthrough came Walk Like an Egyptian, a song with a catchy rhythm, a playful melody, and an attitude that defied logic. At first, the band wasn't even sure they wanted to record it. The idea sounded strange, almost ridiculous, but there was something about it, something powerful. So they took a chance. It turned out to be one of the most important and most complicated decisions of their career. The track became a cultural phenomenon. The sideways dance, the exaggerated moves, the music video playing non-stop on MTV. The Bangles were on top of the world. Walk Like an Egyptian hit #1 on the charts, played at every party, on every show, on every radio. And that's when one small detail changed everything. In the video for Walk Like an Egyptian, Susanna Hoffs made a glance, left to right, intense, flirty, perfectly timed. She did it instinctively, without giving it much thought. But the impact was immediate. The audience loved it. The producers replayed it. The media made it the centerpiece. And inside the band, the tension started to build. Susanna never asked for that attention. She never set out to steal the spotlight, but the spotlight chose her, and that became a problem. Magazines wanted interviews with her, cameras followed her, labels whispered about solo potential. And though all of it came from outside, it unsettled the group's internal balance. Still, the music kept flowing. The album Different Light was a massive success. Triple platinum in the United States, global hits, a tour that seemed endless. But that bright light was starting to burn from within, and the higher they climbed, the harder it became to stay balanced. The Bangles weren't meant to be a one-voice band. That was the promise. But the industry, the marketing, and the speed of success began to tell a different story. A story that turned the band into Susanna Hoffs and the others. And no matter how professional they remained, no matter how much energy they gave on stage, that subtle imbalance became part of the everyday reality. Because the problem wasn't that Susanna was shining. The problem was that the rest felt like no one else could shine quite as brightly. That's the price of fame when it comes too fast and without a manual. On stage, everything looked perfect. But backstage, the glances lasted longer. The words grew fewer, and the fatigue started leaving marks that the music couldn't hide. The Bangles were at their peak, and at the same time, they were walking toward an inevitable fracture.
And eternal flame. Clock already, I was just in the middle of a dream.
No band breaks up over a single reason. It's always a slow build, a series of small cracks that one day just can't hold anymore. In the case of the Bangles, that collapse came disguised as success. Sold-out shows, music videos on constant rotation, and millions of records sold. None of it could hold back what had been quietly building beneath the surface. Arguments became more frequent, sometimes loud and direct, other times wrapped in long silences. The chemistry that had first brought them together in a California garage now dissolved in cold dressing rooms, packed schedules, and decisions made without conversation. And the most painful part wasn't what was said, it was everything left unsaid. Recording sessions began happening separately. Each member would show up to lay down their parts without ever crossing paths. The third album, Everything, reflected all of this. A successful record, but a fractured one. A project where every song seemed to come from a different island. External pressure didn't help either. With growing media interest in Susanna, the label began pushing her as the band's central image. Solo contracts started to circulate, first as rumors, then as actual offers. One was for Susanna, another for Michael Steele. What once would have sounded absurd, going solo, now felt inevitable. And so, in the end, the tensions boiled over. During a tour, backstage, Michael Steele threw a chair against the wall. It wasn't just a fit of rage, it was the raw release of everything that had been held in for years. Frustration, exhaustion, invisibility. Backstage, there was no band anymore. Just 4 individuals trying to survive something that no longer felt like theirs. The public had no idea. They saw the videos, the interviews, the shows, but inside, everything was hanging by a thread. The final straw wasn't a dramatic fight or a formal breakup. It was something colder. Communication stopped. For Debbie Peterson, that silence was unbearable. In later interviews, she admitted that the breakdown was so profound, she seriously considered suicide. She was emotionally drained, feeling like everything she'd built, everything she loved, was falling apart in front of her, and she could do nothing to stop it. There was no official farewell, just a gradual fade, like the echo of a song slowly disappearing, leaving behind nothing but the memory of what once was.
See you in the land of dreams.
After the silence came the emptiness. The Bangles disbanded quietly. No scandal, no official statement, no farewell tour. They simply disappeared from the map. It was 1989, and while the industry kept searching for new female stars to market, they chose anonymity, distance, and real life. Susanna Hoffs did what everyone expected. She went solo. She signed with a label, released her debut album, When You're a Boy, and although the single My Side of the Bed gained some attention, she couldn't recreate the impact she had as part of a band. Not because she lacked talent, but because the chemistry, the harmony that had made the Bangles shine, was missing. At the same time, she was navigating her new life. She married director Jay Roach, best known for the Austin Powers films, and became a mother. Her husband's rising success in Hollywood stood in contrast to her own pause, between diapers, doubts, and songs recorded in the garage. In later interviews, she would describe that period as a silent crisis, not because of motherhood itself, but because of the feeling of having lost touch with her creative identity. Vicki Peterson never stopped making music, but took a quieter path. She joined bands like the Continental Drifters, explored alt-country and folk rock, and later formed Action Skulls with actor Bill Mumy. Debbie Peterson also continued. She launched a project called Smashbox with Gina Shock, drummer of The Go, Goes, and later evolved into another group, Kindred Spirit. Through recordings, collaborations, and occasional performances, she kept an active music career, though far from the noise of the big stages. She got married, had kids, and found a balance she may never have had during the Bangles' peak. Michael Steele was the most elusive. With a strong rock background, having been part of the original lineup of the Runaways, and a private personality, she completely stepped away from the spotlight. She played with some indie bands during the 90s, but officially retired from music in 2005. The pressure, the disillusionment, and the emotional experience of the group had left a mark. She never returned. Years passed. The name The Bangles started popping up with a nostalgic tone on classic radio stations. Then, in the early 2000s, after more than a decade of barely speaking in depth, the members reconnected. It wasn't a master plan or a marketing strategy. It was an honest conversation. All four had changed. They had aged, grown, lived other lives. And when they started talking again, it was from a different place, not from a need to perform, but from a desire to close what had been left open. So, without promises or pressure, they slowly started playing together again. They released an album, Doll Revolution, in 2003, then Sweetheart of the Sun in 2011. These weren't massive hits, but they were genuine. They didn't want to be stars again. They wanted to be a band again. They returned to the stage, mostly at festivals and special shows. The energy wasn't the same as in the 80s, but the intention was. This time, the focus wasn't on fame, it was on real reconnection. Every chord they played became a way to heal. The Bangles didn't come back to relive an era, they came back to close it with dignity. The Bangles achieved everything: global hits, millions of records sold, sold-out tours, and songs that still play decades later. But they were never treated like a real band. There was always a but. They were seen as a cute, accessible group, perfect for radio, but not as serious artists. While other male bands from the same scene were celebrated for their authenticity, the Bangles were judged for their aesthetic and soft vocals. It didn't matter that they played their own instruments, wrote their songs, and delivered flawless harmonies. They were women, and for many, that alone was reason to doubt. Even today, a large portion of comments on social media and forums about the Bangles focus not on their music, but on their appearance. The industry celebrated them when they were selling, but ignored them when they needed respect. But their legacy is real. It lives on in every girl band that writes, sings, and plays without asking for permission. It echoes in every song that blends sweetness and strength without fear of judgment. The Bangles kicked open a door, even if they're not always credited for it. And sometimes, you don't notice the revolution until it's already happened. The Bangles proved that there's no single way to do rock, that you can be soft and powerful at the same time. That authenticity doesn't always get applause, but it leaves a mark. They weren't perfect, they didn't have an easy road, and maybe that's exactly why their story matters so much. Because it's real. Because behind every hit, there are choices, conflicts, breaking points, and also second chances. Now it's your turn. What do you think the Bangles' true legacy is? Were they underestimated by the industry, or just ahead of their time? Let us know in the comments. We want to hear your thoughts. If you enjoyed this trip through time, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. We'll see you in the next video, where the music lives on forever.